We continue here on the Peter B. Collins Show. On March 11th, the earthquake and the tsunami that followed did very severe damage to the Fukushima nuclear reactor family or cluster in northeastern Japan. And we now know the Japanese authorities, including the TEPCO power company, the utility that owns those plants, have not been honest with the Japanese public or the world public at large about the severity of the damage and other issues, including the continuing threats to the nearby population, to produce and animals in the area, and, of course, to the sea life in the surrounding area because of all the leakage of seawater that was poured on the reactors in the days and weeks after the events of March 11th. Kevin Camps returns to our program today. He is the radioactive waste watchdog, that's his title, at Beyond Nuclear, and their website is beyondnuclear.org. Kevin, good to talk with you again.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
I guess where I'd like to start is just with what we now know about the severity of the damage at the cluster of reactors in Fukushima. And the news has come out slowly, but at the end of May, it was essentially confirmed that lies were told, the damage was underreported, and there were meltdowns in 3 of the cores of the reactor cluster there at Fukushima.
Well, just as you said, Tokyo Electric Power Company seems to have hidden a lot of information for as long as possible. But yes, indeed, units 1, 2, and 3 could have experienced complete meltdowns, which means that the radioactive core, the nuclear fuel, has turned into a molten liquid and gathered on the bottom of the reactor pressure vessel itself in each of those units, and very likely burned through those reactor pressure vessels. The final line of defense would be the primary containment structure, and apparently the cooling operations that are ongoing are an attempt to try to prevent that final leakage through that final layer of defense. Because the secondary containment buildings, if your listeners have seen the photographs, are damaged or entirely destroyed. I mean, the Unit 3 reactor building is a pile of rubble at this point. Yeah. So the final line of defense against large-scale radioactivity releases from those reactors is that primary containment structure, which is a concrete and steel structure. And so they are desperately still trying to cool those melted-down cores, which are now molten pools from burning through that final layer. The other bad news involves the pools of high-level radioactive waste storage at the multiple units. Those are not contained within a primary containment structure, so if those pools boil dry, if the wastes inside catch on fire, those are direct radioactivity releases into the environment. That, too, is an ongoing risk. They have taken extraordinary measures, failed drops of water by helicopters, ongoing water cannons and fire trucks firing water into these pools to try to keep them filled, because they have yet to establish ongoing cooling mechanisms in these facilities. It's very much ad hoc at this point.
Now, Kevin, let's start, first of all, with what they knew and when they knew it. I have to believe that the officials on site at Fukushima Daiichi, and there is a separate Fukushima complex a little south of there, the Fukushima Daini, but at Daiichi, they certainly knew the impact of the tsunami, and also that there could have been initial damage from the earthquake itself. And yet they operated with a lot of kind of happy talk and putting the best spin on things. When do you think the officials actually knew about this, and why did it take them 75 days to disclose it to the public?
Well, the devil's in the details. There's a lot of dust left to settle, pardon the pun, but you know, the cover-up is so serious that the Japanese federal government at the highest levels, we're talking the Prime Minister and his immediate spokespeople, are starting to push back on Tokyo Electric Power Company. Unfortunately, Tokyo Electric Power Company has largely been in charge of the information flow, and the federal government there has largely just conveyed TEPCO's revelations as if they were facts. Well, now we realize that there's been a lot of cover-up thus far. As you said, 75 days of cover-up trying to maintain that those reactor cores in units 1, 2, and 3 were being cooled, that there had been partial meltdowns, but now we're seeing that probably we've experienced full meltdowns in the very first days of this disaster. In fact, like you said, it appears that the Unit 1 core began its meltdown even before the tsunami hit. So that was about the 1 hour point of this disaster, and there's indications now that that meltdown was well underway before the tsunami hit. But certainly once the tsunami hit, it took out the emergency diesel generators and plunged Units 2 and 3, as well as those pools, into the crisis state. And so Units 2 and 3 experienced their meltdowns in the first days. And those hydrogen explosions, if your listeners have seen the video, I mean, another unprecedented nature of this catastrophe is the mere fact that on live television, these hydrogen explosions were played in real time. And the hydrogen very likely came from the nuclear fuel rod's cladding interacting with steam, generating hydrogen, which then built up as they desperately tried to vent the overpressurizing reactor containment structures. They vented that hydrogen into the secondary reactor containment building, which then detonated. And in the case of Unit 2, ironically, looks like the reactor building is largely intact, even though there's holes. There are some holes in the walls. Unit 2 is probably the most damaged primary containment structure. There are 2 primary containment structures that TEPCO and even the Japanese government and even the International Atomic Energy Agency admit are damaged. Unit 2, they say, is severely damaged. And as I mentioned, that's the last line of defense. It could well explain why the radioactivity releases to the atmosphere and to the ocean have been so high, at such a high radioactivity level, because we've got leakage from Unit 2's reactor pressure vessel and primary containment structure into the external environment.
And what about the further complication at Unit 3, Kevin, where they had an enriched fuel with extra plutonium? I guess it's kind of like high-test uranium.
Yes, 6% of the Unit 3 core had been loaded with what's called MOX fuel, which is short for uranium-plutonium mixed oxide fuel. And they were on the way to loading a full 33% of that core with plutonium. Fortunately, I guess you could say, only 6% was plutonium. And I was actually invited to Fukushima Daiichi itself last August as a part of the campaign by the local anti-nuclear movement and the national anti-nuclear movement of Japan to stop the loading of plutonium fuel into Japanese reactors across the country. Unfortunately, it failed just a couple weeks after I visited in August. They actually loaded that 6% plutonium core. It's fair to say that doing that contributed to the overheating of the core at Unit 3 because plutonium burns hotter than uranium. And it also is contributing to radiological releases and the toxicity and the hazard. As you said, plutonium is ultra-hazardous as well. Just a microgram, just a microscopic speck inhaled into the human lung will initiate lung cancer over time. It's almost guaranteed.
Kevin Camp's with us, and I'm looking at the beyondnuclear.org website right now. And, Kevin, this was the first time that I saw the news from May 29th of Unit 5 at Fukushima Daiichi. And this, we were told, was a unit that had automatically shut down during the earthquake trauma, or was it shut down beforehand? I'm not clear on that. Actually,
Units 4, 5, and 6 were not operating. They were down for inspections and or maintenance at the time, fortunately. Okay. But Units 1, 2, and 3 were operating at full power, and they immediately scrammed within seconds of the earthquake, but it's not good enough. You have to continue to cool the radioactive cores of operating reactors for many days before you reach cold shutdown. So technically speaking, as you indicated, Units 4, 5, and 6 were already in cold shutdown before the disaster struck. But incredibly, they just experienced, perhaps this may go back to March 11th itself, but just yesterday was it revealed that there's an oil slick off of Unit 5. Apparently, these large, heavy oil containers holding 1 million liters each, and there's 2 of them, so 2 million liters of heavy crude oil were moved 30 feet by the earthquake and perhaps even the tsunami. They were being filled as the natural disaster struck, and now there's an admission by TEPCO that there's a 300-meter-long oil slick into the ocean that they're trying to contain with booms. But it's incredible. Even at the shutdown reactors, they are experiencing oil spills, fires, and also the threat of the pools for high-level radioactive waste storage at those shutdown reactors overheating. And in fact, Unit 4, this is now up for debate as to what exactly happened, but Unit 4 experienced a large-scale hydrogen explosion, and the mystery is what caused it. At first, it was thought that it was the boiling away of the water in the storage pool for high-level radioactive waste, and then the waste catching on fire, releasing its hazards directly into the atmosphere, including hydrogen gas, which then exploded. Apparently, that theory is now under debate, and another theory that's taking precedence is that Unit 3 and 4 share a venting system, and perhaps hydrogen gas generated by Unit 3, which also suffered a massive explosion, went over into the Unit 4 secondary containment building and blew the place apart for the most part. So, you know, the devil's in the details, a lot of dust to settle. We're yet to even understand the basics of what caused certain of the large-scale explosions.